Hi, Sergey. Welcome to the 100X show.
Hey, great to be here.
Our community is very excited about Axelar. It's also one of the projects that scored highly on our Hidden Gem report. So we wanted to have you on our podcast show so our community can learn about the project and also about yourself. To kick things off, Sergey, can you tell a little bit about yourself and the team at Axelar? So with this question, I'm trying to assess for my community how good the founder market fit is.
Yeah, sounds great. So my background, distributed systems, cryptography. I worked on various protocols over the years. I went to grad school at MIT to do formal cryptography, and then by the end of it, got into the blockchain space. Right. So some of the early protocols we worked on were protocols like Algorand. Right. So we kind of spun it up with a group out of MIT and a few folks in Boston. So we launched that product to the market, and then afterwards saw the rising need for secure interoperability across different blockchains, right? And we started the project with my co-founder Yorgos, who is also an MIT alumni, and we worked on Algorand together. And since then, we grew the team to just a little over 30 people. We have an amazing talent, ranging from folks that are experts in distributed systems, cryptography, consensus mechanism, and more recently we started to grow our kind of go-to-market and business development functions, which also have individuals coming from startup space, fintech space, which I'm super excited about.
So just let me ask, like at Algorand, what was the inspiration that led you to like go away from Algorand and just start your own endeavor and focus on XLR? Like what was the inspiration?
Yeah, I mean, when we shipped Algorand to the ecosystem, one of the early problems we saw is just connectivity across different chains, right? So we wanted to bootstrap some of the early activity, bringing in assets like Bitcoin, Ethereum to the Algorand ecosystem, and there was no really easy protocol and nothing really available that you can just come in and plug and play, right, in the market. And in parallel, we just saw an array of other wonderful like ecosystems being built, everything from Cosmos, Polkadot, right, kind of Solana, Avalanche, Terra, and so on and so forth. And we realized that we're going to be in a multi-chain future with many different use cases and applications spread across these ecosystems, and the need for connectivity is going to be more and more critical. Technically, I think it's one of the most difficult and also exciting problems, and so we decided to kind of take it head on.
I think now will be a good time to segue into a macro overview of what XLR does and how is it different from perhaps Cosmos and Polkadot.
Yeah, so on a very high level, Axelar, what we're building is a infrastructure and a set of protocols to make secure cross-chain communication come to reality, right? At the very core of it is a decentralized network, right? That can validate and process messages across different blockchains in a secure way, right? And our end goal is to really empower developers to build on the best platform for their needs and enable users to interact with all of these platforms with one-click experiences, right? So any asset, any application you see, any blockchain that's on, you should be able to go and click, from one wallet in one transaction and interact with those applications and assets. And I think kind of back to your second question, how does it compare with Cosmos and Polkadot? Well, Cosmos and Polkadot, I think, were some of the early, projects that started to think about interoperability, but they mainly focused on it for their own ecosystems, right? So connectivity across Cosmos-based, chains through Tendermint, through protocols like IBC, and in Polkadot you have protocols that allow Terra chains to interact with one another. But those protocols are really hard to scale, across other ecosystems that speak very different consensus or different languages, right? So, and to connect these blockchains that speak different languages, you have to have a different set of requirements that you're optimizing for to make it as easy as possible to just plug and go, right? And so that's what led us to think about, Axelar and designing really a universal protocol that can connect any blockchain out there in an easy way.
I think for our audience, it would be better if I just share my screen and maybe you can also walk us through the XLR tech stack, like from a macro view, but to kind of give them an intuition on how this cross-chain communication would work. So let me just share my screen. Yeah, so I saw this on the website, the Axelar tech stack. So maybe perhaps just walk us through how this will work.
Yeah, sounds great. So let's start top to bottom in this diagram, right? Kind of going back to what we enable is we enable developers to build on any chain that they like, right? So as an application builder, you can go and deploy your contracts, on Ethereum if you want, on Avalanche, on Cosmos, anywhere you want. From there, we support a set of APIs and protocols that will allow your application to be multi-chain enabled and go cross-chain, right? So what that means is that from an application, you can make a call to an API, which is typically hosted by a gateway, which is a smart contract that lives on the platform where your application resides, right? And so gateway, you can think of it as a kind of router that allows you to talk with other ecosystems, right? So you can post messages to it and you can read messages from it. And so once your application makes a request to this gateway, then underneath it, the Axel network will make sure it's processed securely, right? So it would finalize it, it would route it to the right chain, it would help you execute it, all in a simple, one transaction that the user submitted from their front ends. And the Axel network itself and its protocols is a permissionless network, right? That's why you have kind of set of validators that are here on the diagram, and the validators run a proof of stake consensus protocol to process and finalize those cross-chain messages, right? So it's a highly secure, it's highly efficient network that you can pass through in order to send your messages across different blockchains. And from a developer environment, it's a very simple onboarding experience where you can build on a platform where your use case can be executed the most effectively, right? But you can still compose with other ecosystems by communicating with API and interacting with other chains.
Yeah. So when I had Brian on my 100x show, he was pitching layer zero. So one idea he had was, let's say when you have a kind of like a middle chain, one of the risk is, let's say, if there's a kind of a 51% attack, since it's connected to all the other blockchains, that could be a risk. And risk might not be fragmented to, let's say, one chain, and it would be fragmented to a lot of chain. Hypothetically, if there is network effect. So how would you defend that, like that argument, and how would you kind of say you guys are different or maybe perhaps more efficient than some of the competition emerging, such as layer zero, for example?
Yeah, so all of the solutions you see out there in the market are pretty much kind of centralized multi-sigs. Okay, that includes like layer zero and some of the protocols that they build out there. That's one thing, and two, they're pairwise, right? So pairwise, what that means is that as you add new chains and new connections, you have to then understand, well, how does routing work across these chains? How does asset fungibility works across these chains, and so on and so forth, right? So what we have focused at Axelar is really build kind of decentralized and permissionless layer, right, that you can securely trust to connect all these different ecosystems. And that's not what's sort of available anywhere else in the market, right? I think you can, at the very core of it, any technology that communicates from one chain to another needs to have validation layers and validation logic, right? So for a lot of the competitors, it's sort of either multi-sigs or like external oracles that are doing this validation. All of them are closed sets of parties and participants. And kind of the core difference is that for Axel, it's an open set that you can rely on and base security on the same assumptions as the actual chains that you're connecting, right? If you're going from proof of stake chain to another proof of stake chain, having a proof of stake kind of a model in the middle makes a lot of sense. Having other trust assumptions, whether or not they're federated or closed, it's an additional layer of complexity and assumptions you're going to be taking on, and relying kind of the providers of those functionalities to be there all the time and not censor transactions, for instance.
Yeah, that makes sense. I also wanted to take your comment on this. You mentioned pairwise. So in case of XLR, you don't have this pairwise. It could be kind of omni-chain. It could be all the chains simultaneously. Just wanted to comment on the scalability. Like, do you find there could be some concerns on the scalability side, or how you're trying to tackle that design space?
Yeah, no, so that's a great question, right? So in general, like you can only have, let's say, two models of connectivity, right? There is, everything is pairwise, for instance, right? Or you have kind of hub and spoke model or something in the middle. right? Pairwise cannot scale purely because with the world with thousands of chains, you're going to be requiring an order of n squared connections across all these chains. Like who's going to manage it, right? Like who's going to maintain them, who's going to secure them. So that just doesn't scale, right? So no matter what, then you end up in a situation in a world where traffic from one chain to another has to go through some intermediary network, right? And so what you want to do is that you want to make sure that these intermediate networks are sort of as optimal to give you the best quality of service that you desire, right? With the cheapest cost of processing messages, with the fastest cost of processing messages, and by kind of connecting you with as many ecosystems as possible without introducing like 20 hops along the way, right? So I think we're going to be living in a world where you'll probably have multiple sort of hubs of connectivity, right? And in Axelar network, like you can certainly instantiate it in a multi-hub model, right? Where some hubs and some chains are connected with some ecosystems or some number of connections. They all talk to one another, right? And that's how you scale. I think the critical piece is the following. I think in the blockchain space in general, we need to minimize the number of hubs or connections a traffic goes through when they go from a source to destination, because every time you make those connections, you add in latency, you add in fees, and you add in some assumptions in the process, right? So and in that model, kind of a hub and spoke model, or what we call like as an overlay model, gives you the most cost-effective mechanism and the best security that's possible out there. Right? And I think kind of a one way of thinking about it, as you as you think about the topology overall, you can build like pairwise connections and bridges, right, across different state borders and different nations, and you can travel by car, and when the car breaks down, you have to go and refuel it and go to a repair shop, and take a long time doing that. And I guess what we're doing with Axelar and the network that we're building is almost like creating airplanes and airports, right? That you can travel more effectively and more efficiently, and like you have these hubs of connectivity that will give you an effective and easy way to just get to your destination in a shortest amount of time.
Yeah, that makes sense. I believe the journal message passing functionality has gone live, and that's also kind of exciting because now you'll have cross-chain use cases in DeFi, NFT, governance, and what have you. So can you comment on that? Like, how does that look? And also perhaps highlights some of the unique use cases that the community is thinking about, or some of the projects that have approached you in terms of building something which is very unique and different that a lot of people might not understand at the moment, since we don't have cross-chain communication.
Yeah, no, so that's a great question. I think in general, I'm super excited about this kind of functionality going live, right? So, the way to kind of compare it is that kind of traditionally, people used to thinking about bridges and token bridges to transfer their assets to where the applications reside, right? So, user goes to some front end, moves their asset back and forth, and like has to pay the transaction fees in the process, and so on and so forth. I think with general message passing, we're entering the world where you can move some of the application state or logic across different chains to potentially where the asset is, right? So your functionality is now not limited to token transfers. It extends beyond that to NFT transactions, NFT calls, cross-chain like lending and borrowing, creating universal like liquidity layers, right? And the goal is, again, get to the user experience where a single transaction from a user wallet can encode information that travels across different networks, be executed by different applications, and return back to the user, right? I guess one exciting use case to think about is, for instance, cross-chain borrowing and lending, right? So imagine you have an NFT like on Solana, and you want to take a loan against it on Avalanche, right? Traditionally, what that means is like you have to maybe bridge your NFT over, lock it, on Avalanche, and then take a loan against it in another currency, on Avalanche. Lots of transactions, lots of interactions for the users. I think what now is possible is to, enable a process where your NFT can be locked, on Solana. A message can be passed to Avalanche that encodes, how much your asset is worth, and includes your destination address, and you take a loan, and it's sort of deposited automatically to your destination address on Avalanche. Right. So like super exciting use case, not something you can do before. It would definitely require you to either bridge your old asset in one way or another and execute like multiple transactions across the whole ecosystem.
Are there any application you can think of that are being built leveraging this, leveraging XLR to do this? I know of satellite, for example, but are there any other applications like that by the community or perhaps by the ecosystem supported by XLR?
Yeah, I mean, Axel is Satellite is a simple front end, right? That's built to do like asset transfer functionality. Some big applications. So we, for instance, recently won a vote on Osmosis to be the canonical bridge provider for their DEX in their chain, right? So what that means is that the asset will be able to move in and out to Osmosis. You'll be able to deposit it with one click. More broadly, we're working with the team to extend the functionality of Osmosis and some of the swapping features that they're working on to make that available also as an API and liquidity layer on other chains, right? So kind of using general message passing features, you'll be able to not just interact through the front end, but also make calls that route users' assets, across different chains, do the swaps, if there's a deeper liquidity on Osmosis, and then get their assets on the destination chains. So kind of super excited on that. And the range kind of continues of applications from wallets to cross-chain, NFTs, DeFi, kind of lending and borrowing. So yeah, we have like a whole pipeline of projects that are building. We actually, recently ran a grants program where we had, close to, I think, 100 applicants that submitted their applications for grants. We gave over 18 grants to various teams, and they're building across a range of these use cases that I mentioned.
Fascinating. So you did mention there will be a validator set that will basically be in the middle and help do that cross-chain communication. That kind of highlights to me that there will be interesting use cases for AXL token, for example, for security, while some of the other competitors, for example, Layer 0, since they might be using Oracle and Relay, just those two external services, the use case of the token might potentially be limited. So can you walk us through the token utility of AXL and how it will be used in the whole ecosystem?
Yeah, for sure. So kind of a back to the network itself, the Axel network provides, a number of core functionalities, right? For instance, cross-chain message processing, translation of messages across different ecosystem, routing and delivery, right? And making all of that as secure as possible. So the Axel token is used for helping secure the network, right? Where users can actually stake their token with validators. Validators are running these protocols to enable this functionalities. It's used to to pay for cross-chain transaction fees, right? So whenever you go from one chain to another, the Axel network will process and help that message be delivered. So certain transaction fees need to be paid in the Axel token. And it's used for the governance of the system itself, right? So for coordination of upgrades to the network, for incentivizing of validators to run nodes and other ecosystem participants. And I think the key point to mention there is that while you do, pay kind of with Axel token the transaction fees, that actually all happens under the hood and the user is never exposed to it, right? So the way we build the architecture in the network is that when applications make calls to go cross-chain, they can actually pay a fee, in, let's say, ETH, if it's a call from Ethereum on the source chain, and that fee is automatically taken to take care of all the other fees on the bridging chains, including like the Axel network itself, right? So from a user perspective, they don't necessarily have to interact with the Axel token, but it plays like this core utility function for actually processing those messages. And, there's various conversions between like ETH and Axel token and things like that will happen on the back end.
And theoretically, can any chain be integrated? So, for example, for my understanding at the moment, I think it's EVM compatible and maybe IBC compatible. But in the future, can any chain with their own operating system can be integrated? For example, Solana, Near, or other chains perhaps in the future.
Yes, definitely, right. And I think that's back to one of the core design principles that we had for building the Axel network is make it as simple as possible to integrate new chains, right? So for instance, like we've ran a Bitcoin test network for over 6 months. We have various other connections that will be going live over the coming months. And what we're also working on is kind of extending it so anybody can build their connections, right? So you're not just dependent on Axelar, but there's some new exciting upgrades that we'll be sharing over the coming weeks, where will allow anybody to make and build these connections, which I think is going to really take this kind of to the next level.
Awesome. Um, at the moment, it seems everything like is working according to plan. So I just wanted to pick your brains with regard to some of the technical challenges you have faced till this moment, and perhaps some of the significant risk you see for XLR going forward that you guys are trying to tackle at the moment, or that might emerge in the future.
Yeah, so I mean, I think overall building a secure cross-chain communication is not an easy problem, right? I think as you see, a lot of ad hoc solutions been rolled out over the last year. Many of those solutions get hacked, right? And I think security for these technologies is something you have to think very, very carefully about, right? And I think on that we have really like the best team, I think, solving this problem. The experts in cryptography, like I mentioned, systems and security in general. And we've been taking this problem of security very seriously, right? Kind of thinking about it, making sure first the starting design principles make sense, right? You want to build on a platform that's open and permissionless, allow other people to look at the code, audit it, make suggestions, right? And that's kind of the core foundation of what we're doing in Axelar. And then everything up the stack with operations, engineering, and everything else that has to be put in place. So I would say that's definitely one of the most things for us to kind of continue thinking about security, take it very very seriously, especially given like all the hacks and everything else you see in the space. Like it's very clear that like centralized solutions cannot work, period, right? Like you need something a lot more robust than that.
Yeah, this makes sense. So apart from Axelar, I also wanted to discuss and get your views on how do you kind of see the whole layer one space emerge? Like, do you kind of see going forward there will be perhaps 4 or 5 chains emerging, having the dominant network effect? Or is there a possibility we might have, let's say, 10, 20, maybe 100, maybe millions? Because we still see a lot of blockchains still being developed, like Celestia is coming, Aptos is coming. I heard about a chain called Shardium, which is basically taking Ethereum and making a sharded architecture and coming. So do you think there will be a lot of L1s? There'll be few. Will it be an oligopolistic structure? How do you kind of see the space evolving with your interaction with other founders?
I mean, I definitely think it's going to be a multi-chain future, and we're going to see that more and more as we evolve, right? And I think there's very kind of core fundamental technical requirements for that. And the reason is as follows: you can go and build on top of a shared environment and have composability and networking effects take over almost instantly, right? And that's why we're seeing things like Ethereum pick up, Avalanche general platforms, and so on and so forth. And that's a must for applications that are still trying to find like product market fit, right? You want to get access to the users, you want to get access to the liquidity, you want to validate your application and figure out whether or not it makes sense for the users. But from there, when applications grow and keep on growing, they sometimes need to scale and control their own destiny a little bit more, right? So you don't want to be in a world where one day the user pays 5 cents for a transaction fee, the next day when they wake up they pay $100, right? Like that's not the world that the users and like a retail and an average user can go and participate in. So as an application builder, then there's more and more demand for you to go and build either your own chain, right, or build on another environment that potentially has kind of a fewer competing applications with you. But while going there, the critical requirement for you is to be able to still compose and interact with all the other ecosystems, right? Like you don't want to just lose the liquidity and lose this connectivity with other worlds. So that's the path that I see, right? Where we have this global kind of environments that are shared across many applications, and you can go and build things there instantly. But as you find product market fit and you need to control your destiny a little bit more, you may need to kind of go to environments where you have more flexibility to do so.
Yeah, this brings me to the UI UX question. So when you have monolithic chain, like let's say Ethereum at its current state, you have composability, like it's kind of frictionless. But do you think, let's say, when we have multiple chains and then with the protocol like Axelar that's facilitating cross-chain communication. Do you kind of see this one extra step of friction that can hinder the user experience, or and if so, how are you thinking about that problem going forward? Like, how can you just minimize that and have a frictionless experience for the user?
I think kind of when you think about the technology at the core, there are multiple hubs that will have to happen. But what we are building is really delivering one-click experiences for the users, right? And that involves really a combination of network and various services around that, right? So like I mentioned, we want to make sure that the user can only pay the transaction fee in one transaction on the source chain and never have to think about the underlying like hops across different networks, right? So that requires like these layers of services to build around the network to help those things make happen. I do think it's possible, right? It does require you to think in the right way about the architecture. But I think like, again, going back to, some analogies, on the intranet, when you and I speak and like, doing a podcast, information travels across dozens of networks, right? We don't see those things. We're not exposed to all of that. And there's sets of protocols and services and the infrastructure that was built to make these experiences as smooth as possible, right? So it's all possible to cross boundaries and talk across multiple networks. Do you want to do it by car or by an airplane? It's kind of your choice, right? And I think what we're doing is kind of building this, efficient airplanes to make this easier, so like you can do these things with one click.
Understood. Sergey, before we conclude, is there anything that you would like to add or that we might have missed out during our discussion?
Yeah, no, I want to say, we're still kind of early, super excited to continue onboarding more chains and more applications around the network, right? So come join the community, visit axel.network, sign up for Twitter account, Discord, Telegram and other channels. We're actively growing and continuing to hire. So, we have opportunities across the whole stack from, business development, marketing functions, technical. And I think the next generation of applications is all going to be cross-chain and multi-chain. And the only question is, how early or late are you going to be in that pipeline? And I encourage folks to kind of join and work with us.
Sergey, thank you for joining us on 100X. I personally learned a lot, and I'm very excited about what future holds for Axelar. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. It was a great chatting.